Ladies and gentlemen, children of all wages, we are now at the home run stretch of the regular season in our countdown to kickoff series, the late October to November stretch of the games. These are teams that Oregon will be playing that they do have a history with, as opposed to the last 2 or 3 episodes of this show. Not a whole lot of history there, but now we're getting into the meat of it. And this next one is a pretty interesting history. I think that a lot of us don't really know until now. Enjoy the show.
Foot race to their sideline. Touchdown, Oregon!
He throws, end zone, Posey, touchdown, Ohio State. They give it to him, watch out! C.J. Verdell at midfield, high stepping, can the Bucks catch him? Verdell still running, touchdown Oregon! 77 yards on 3rd down and 3. The 3rd touchdown of the game for C.J. Verdell.
What this team overcame this season.
One of the great stories in college football history of closeness, of team.
3rd and 20. Howard, a lot of time coming off. Howard's going to run for it. Time runs out, and that'll do it.
Oh my goodness.
Welcome to the Big Ten, Oregon. They storm the field at Autzen, and the Ducks win this bout 32-31.
Tennessee come to the Rose Bowl in what was considered a toss-up rematch game. Get your revenge. Ohio State overwhelming today. And look out, Longhorns, because the Scarlet and Gray Redemption Tour arrives in Texas for the semifinals with serious steam.
Now, despite popular belief in the 1910s to about 1920, Oregon was a contending football team just about every year under Coach Hugo Bezdek. Now, in 1916, they fell just short in the AP voting to win the national championship. They had a pretty good case, really. And in 1917, Hugo Bezdek left to coach the Mare Island Marine football team, taking some of the Webfoot team from Eugene down to Vallejo, California to play for that Mare Island team. A lot of it had to do with some of those guys going to fight in World War I. Now, that didn't stop the players in Eugene from making the Rose Bowl in 1917, where they played the University of Pennsylvania, where they won 14-7. Now, the next time that Oregon went to the Rose Bowl was in 1920, where they played Harvard and unfortunately lost 7-6. Now, 1920 was the last time that Oregon had gone to the Rose Bowl up until that point. They had a 38-year drought, and that was until 1958 when they played the Ohio State Buckeyes for the first time in program history.
Good afternoon, everybody, and Happy New Year. This is Chick Hearn with Mel Allen.
Happy New Year, everybody.
Speaking to you from the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California for the Gillette Safety Razor Company. And we're all set to bring you the 1958 Rose Bowl game between the Ohio State Buckeyes and the University of Oregon Ducks.
Much like the second matchup between Oregon and Ohio State in a Rose Bowl game in 2010, in 1957, it was the Civil War game that was the deciding factor on who would go to the Rose Bowl. The difference between the 2009 Civil War game and the 1957 Civil War game was that the Beavers actually beat the Webfoots in 1957. Now, why didn't the Beavers end up going into the Rose Bowl game that year? Well, the Pacific Coast Conference had a no repeat clause in the conference bylaws, and Oregon State had gone to the 1957 Rose Bowl playing Iowa in the previous year. So they actually were not allowed to play in the 1958 Rose Bowl, resulting in the runner-up of the Pacific Coast Conference, Oregon, going to that Rose Bowl game.
A beautiful Willamette Valley, 124 miles south of Portland. The Oregon team is called the Ducks, or the Webfoots. They're coached by Len Casanova. Len has just completed 7 years of coaching. He was picked to finish this year 7th or 8th in the Pacific Coast Conference, but as you well know, he came up with a tremendous season and tied with Oregon State for the Pacific Coast Conference title. Oregon students have deep appreciation for Coach Len Casanova. In 1954, they presented him with a plaque which read, and I quote, "Having given us victory by reestablishing an undying Oregon spirit, you have won the respect and admiration of your team and the entire Oregon family." Overall this year, the University of Oregon Ducks had a record of 7 wins and 3 defeats. Defeated by Pittsburgh 6-3 on a pass play in the last 20 seconds. They lost to Washington 13-6, and Oregon State edged them in the season finale 10-7 to earn the Pacific Coast Conference tie. In victories, Oregon defeated Idaho 9-6, beat UCLA 21-0, shut out San Jose State 26-0, edged Washington State 14-13, beat California 24-6, edged Stanford 27-26, and defeated Southern California 16-7. In the 10 ball games this year for the University of Oregon, they averaged 15 points per game offensively. They allowed the opponent just 8.5 points per game. Now the Ohio State Buckeyes, and proud they are, from Columbus, Ohio. This great institution was opened in 1873 with just 17 students. Today, the Buckeye School boasts an enrollment of 22,400 students. And Coach Woody Hayes, like Casanova, has completed his 7th year at Columbus. In those 7 years, Woody's teams have won 47, lost 15, and tied 2. Now, Woody Hayes' record in the Big Ten has been fantastic. His Buckeyes have won the undisputed Big Ten championships in 3 of the last 4 years. In fact, Ohio State has won, get this, ladies and gentlemen, Ohio State has won 24 of its last 26 conference games. Included in this was a string of 17 straight conference wins, and that's an all-time Big Ten record. Now, Woody Hayes' 1954 team was acclaimed national champions, and the team that you'll see here today was rated as the top collegiate team in the country by 2 of the National Press Association.
Coming into this game, it was an absolute mismatch on paper. Ohio State was a 21-point favorite. Oregon was unranked, and Ohio State was ranked number 2 in one poll and number 1 in another. And Ohio State had a lot of talent going to the NFL. For the Webfoots, not so much. However, this game did not turn out in the way that everyone expected. It became a defensive battle of brutality and grit, mostly shown by the Webfoots. Ohio State scored a touchdown on the first drive, going up 7-0, but Oregon tied it up in the second quarter with a touchdown of their own. Oregon would not budge and lay down and let this game get out of hand. They even had a chance to take the game lead in the third quarter with a field goal, but unfortunately, kicker Jack Morris missed it wide left. Ohio State took advantage in the fourth quarter and hit a field goal of their own, going up 10-7. Now the Webfoots, though, they were on their way to answering that field goal, but that was until tight end Ron Stovert fumbled the ball on a critical possession in the game, giving the ball back to Ohio State. Ohio State tried to run the clock down, but the Webfoots made a stop where they were able to get the ball back and had one last chance to take the game away. But unfortunately, they fell short when a 4th down pass by Webfoot quarterback Jack Crabtree fell incomplete with 47 seconds left, resulting in a turnover on downs and a 10-7 victory by the Buckeyes in the 1958 Rose Bowl. Now the final score may have gone the Buckeyes' way, but it was actually the Webfoots who had the ultimate moral victory unlike anything you've ever seen in college football. The Webfoots outgained the Buckeyes 351 yards to 304 and converted 21 first downs to Ohio State's 19. And despite Ron Stover's costly fumble, he did set a Pacific Coast Conference record in the Rose Bowl with 10 receptions for 144 yards. All of this contributed to Oregon's press takeover of this game, despite Ohio State leaving this game as winners and eventual national champions. The newspapers talked about Oregon's performance in this game even though they had lost. Everyone was impressed with how they played in such a lopsided matchup. Webfoot quarterback Jack Crabtree is actually one of a few players of a Rose Bowl losing team to win the MVP of the game, and one of two to win the award without sharing it from a member of the winning team. To this day, Crabtree is the most recent one, as well as the only other unanimous losing MVP was Cal's Benny Long, who won it in 1929. This game was the start of sort of a friendly handshake-based rivalry rather than a hated one between Ohio State and Michigan in the Big Ten. There was a lot of good sportsmanship behind it, but it was kind of a nice to see you again type of rivalry. Now, a little side story here was that Oregon and Ohio State had a friendly wager before this game involving a tree exchange. And legendary Ohio State coach Woody Hayes was so impressed with Oregon's performance that he actually planted a yellow Buckeye tree on the Oregon campus that was planted by Len Casanova, coach of the Oregon Webfoots, and Jack Crabtree, the MVP of the Rose Bowl.
I've had dreams about this moment the last couple of days. I've been really looking forward to this event. It's such a beautiful time down here.
The tree still stands in front of Lillis Business Complex, and in 2013, the tree was commemorated with a plaque with Crabtree and others from that team in attendance, also with current players helping with that commemoration ceremony at the time, like DeAnthony Thomas. Now, by the time that 1958 Rose Bowl came about, Ohio State had already established themselves as a Big Ten mainstay and a certified, undisputed college football blue blood. Now, the trajectory between these two teams went a little different after that game. Oregon got worse, and Ohio State got better. So, over the course of time in the 60s and 70s in particular, when they played each other, they were blowouts. But I am going to take you to one game that was a blowout in 1967, but it was still a historical moment for both the Webfoots and the Buckeyes. Today you look at the site of what was once Kincaid Field, and it's basically just a patch of grass in between buildings for students on the University of Oregon campus to walk from class to class. But in the early years of Oregon football, that was actually their football field. Now legendary Hayward Field was built to house the football team as well as the track team in the early 1900s. Now legendary being the key phrase, because now you see Hayward Field as a world-class track and field facility where Olympians from all over the world come to train and compete in Eugene in that stadium. But for decades, Kincaid, then after that Hayward Field, the conditions were absolute mud pits. Not at all conducive for a good football game. If you remember my video with Nebraska, and I mentioned Oregon using Multnomah Stadium in Portland for big matchups, the conditions at Hayward Field is exactly why. Now, if you want to know why it's called the Casanova Center in the athletic complex in Oregon, well, that's because Len Casanova for many years had hard petitioned for a pure, dedicated football stadium to be built on the Oregon campus. He finally got his wish in the mid-60s when he was athletic director in getting Autzen Stadium built, where its completion happened and was ready for a game in 1967. Now, by the time 1967 came around, Casanova had actually been moved to athletic director of the program, so he actually never coached a single game in that stadium. But he was a big part in getting that stadium made and getting that stadium going, and that was the first official day, dedication day, for Autzen Stadium in October 7th, 1967. And who did Oregon play for the official launch of that stadium? Ohio State. The pageantry of Autzen Stadium's first official game lasted about as long until opening kickoff because, well, it was Ohio State in the 60s and, well, it was Oregon in the 60s. So the Buckeyes destroyed the Webfoots 30-0 in Autzen Stadium. The closest score in all the matchups between Ohio State and Oregon from the 60s to the 90s was a game in 1987 where the score was 24-14. And then after that 87 game, Oregon didn't see Ohio State for about 20 more years after that until, you guessed it, that 2010 Rose Bowl game.
Last year, Beavers fans said we had an excuse. Wiz Rogers couldn't play. 2 years ago, Ducks fans said, wait a minute, our excuse was Dennis Dixon was hurt. Tonight, no excuses. All the playmakers on both sides are healthy.
Now, much like that 1958 Rose Bowl game, the 2010 Rose Bowl game was decided by the Civil War game in November a few months before. Now, this time was a little different though, because the Pac-12 didn't have the same bylaws as the Pacific Coast Conference. There was no repeat clause. So this game was known as the War for the Roses because whoever won would go to that game. And Oregon won this game outright, so they were going. Now, this was the first time since the 1994 magical season that Oregon finally made it to the Rose Bowl after a few near misses. Oregon was leveling up again as a program. Now, Ohio State, on the other hand, was a perpetual national championship conversation team and settled, quote unquote, for that Rose Bowl game.
You are looking live at the Rose Bowl in Pasadena, California, site of a holiday tradition that has brightened the new year for over a century. And on a beautiful Southern California afternoon, we welcome you to the Rose Bowl presented by Citi. Today, the Ohio State Buckeyes, Big Ten champions for the 5th straight year, face the Oregon Ducks, Pac-10 champions for the first time since 2001.
This matchup was a lot less lopsided than their first Rose Bowl matchup in '58. Oregon was on the rise, so they were sort of seen as somewhat of an equal team to Ohio State. However, Ohio State was still pretty favored in this game to win. Oregon stayed within one momentum swing of taking this matchup. In fact, they even in the second half took a 2-point lead. But unfortunately, that 2-point lead in the third quarter was about as much as Oregon could muster up in this matchup. This was the height of the Chip Kelly era, where Chip Kelly had zero regard for time of possession, and Ohio State took advantage of that and ground out the time of possession and the game, keeping the ball for 41 minutes, forcing Oregon to score as much as possible in 19. And we all know that doesn't always happen. It's not a score every time, even though that's what the Ducks' style was, scoring every time they got the ball. But that didn't happen, of course, because Ohio State obviously had a pretty good defense, and Ohio State ended up winning 26-17. If you've ever played video games, you know that in the last level of the game, to win the game, you had to beat the final boss. And it seems like after the 2010 Rose Bowl game, that final boss for Oregon became Ohio State. And they got another chance to try to defeat the final boss in the 2015 National Championship game.
And here come the Oregon Ducks. Always fast and fashionable. White top, silver pants, and camo tights. Their fans are known as being loud per capita in Autzen Stadium. But get ready for the roar as the Buckeyes come in here. Perhaps 70% of this place, Ohio State fans. the first of its kind. And no other big event really feels quite like this.
Now, the 2014 season was the first inaugural year of the college football playoff format. Now, as opposed to the college football playoff format we see today, back then it was 4 teams and 4 teams only. Ohio State was sitting at number 5 and battling with TCU and Baylor for that 4th place spot to get into the playoff. Now, they were led by 3rd string quarterback Cardale Jones, who kept Ohio State winning and in that race, but the College Football Playoff Committee was not quite impressed enough and convinced. The differentiating factor was that the Big 12 did not have a conference championship game, but the Big 10 did, and Ohio State showed out by beating Wisconsin 59-0, and still the College Football Playoff Committee stayed up all night deciding whether or not allowing Ohio State to leapfrog TCU and Baylor was a good idea, and eventually they decided after all that it was. After the committee finally decided to put Ohio State in the number 4 seed in the playoffs looked like this: Alabama at number 1, Oregon at number 2, Florida State at number 3, and Ohio State at number 4, boxing out the Big 12 as a whole conference from the playoff spot. Going into these playoffs, no one really cared or thought it mattered who was the number 4 seed because they were going up against peak Nick Saban, Alabama at the time. So they assumed that whoever was going to play in that position was just going to lose anyway. But Ohio State took advantage of that opportunity, and they had something else in mind. They upset the Crimson Tide 42-35, led by star running back Ezekiel Elliott's 230 yards rushing with 2 TDs. And at that point, it became seen that Ohio State might be the team of destiny that season, second to the original team of destiny in the regular season, the Oregon Ducks. Going into the 2014 season, Oregon kind of flew under the radar a bit. There wasn't a crazy hype machine behind them like there was in the 2010 season when they last went to the national championship at that time. Chip Kelly had just left Oregon to coach elsewhere, leaving the reins of the program in the hands of Coos Bay native Mark Helfrich, leading the mighty men of Oregon. However, this year Oregon went on a run, led by the generational talent, the Flying Hawaiian, and the first ever Oregon Heisman Trophy winner, Marcus Mariota. He was the reason why Oregon became the team of destiny in the regular season.
The winner of the 2014 Heisman Memorial Trophy is Marcus Mariota of the University of Oregon.
Thank you to the University of Oregon for the education and support. Thank you to the community of Eugene for the hospitality and allowing me to meet wonderful people like Phil Knight. Phil and Penny, thank you for all your contributions to the university. And to Duck fans everywhere, thank you. To the men of Kalaipo Haku and the St. Louis Brotherhood, thank you for teaching me to always be mindful and faithful. A special thanks goes to my boys who believed in me. Thank you. To Hawaii Ne, thank you for teaching me humility and respect. Two aspects of my life that I will never change. To the Polynesian community, I hope and pray that this is only the beginning. Young poly athletes everywhere, you should take this as motivation and dream big and strive for greatness. This is the hardest part. Finally, Mom, Dad, Matt, and the rest of my family, thank you. Thank you for sacrificing and providing me and Matt every opportunity we could ever have. Words can't express how much you guys mean to me. I'm truly grateful to have you guys in my life. Mom and Dad, thank you for your love and sharing that with me and Matt. We're truly grateful. God bless, and go Ducks.
Mariota in 2014 was an unstoppable force yet to meet an immovable object. He was the prototype of a dual threat quarterback. He had crazy speed who could beat you on his legs. And if you try to stop him in the run game, well, guess what? He had a pocket passer level accurate arm. He put up video game numbers this year, and he barely broke a sweat doing it. He was Oregon's chosen one, and it's no surprise that he was the first Heisman winner of this program, and why in the Casanova Center there is an entire expo of him and his career in Eugene, Oregon as we speak. Not only was he the chosen one to bring the Heisman home to Oregon, but everyone thought he was going to be the one to finally bring a national championship in Eugene as well. Now, before the playoffs happened, Oregon had their typical upset that would usually spiral their season and spoil their season out of control when they lost a close one to Arizona 31-24. However, Oregon got a chance at redemption in the Pac-12 conference championship game against Arizona again, and they took complete advantage of that, blowing out the Wildcats 51-13. Oregon's date with destiny would not be messed with, and it was still on track going into the playoffs at the number 2 seed. Now on Oregon's side of the playoff bracket, they were number 2 seed playing the number 3 seed and defending national champions, the Florida Seminoles, led by Heisman Trophy winner from the previous year, Jameis Winston. And the first half of this game was going to look like another battle. And despite Oregon being ranked higher than Florida State, everyone sort of expected Florida State to win because Oregon still had a reputation of not showing up in these type of games. And Florida State, naturally so, were trying to defend their national championship from the year before. So they thought Florida State would easily just probably go on a run. That was until the second half of the Rose Bowl when turnovers took this game from a close battle back and forth game to a 59-20 blowout. Oregon were the 2-time Rose Bowl champs in 3 years and headed to their second national championship in 5 years. And a shot at redemption and a date with destiny against their final boss. Leading up to this matchup, Ohio State was still rocking with Cardale Jones and rolling with Ezekiel Elliott. Oregon was down star wide receiver Devin Allen, who was injured in the opening kickoff of the previous Rose Bowl game. Star quarterback Ifo Ekpre-Olomu was injured in a December practice, and star tight end Pharaoh Brown was out since the regular season game against Utah, and star wide receiver Braylon Addison was out the whole year, and star wide receiver Darren Carrington was suspended right before this game after failing a drug test. Unfortunately, because of that depleted roster, Oregon then became pretty outmatched in that game and ended up not looking like they really belonged playing on the same field as Ohio State. Despite a gritty performance from Marcus Mariota, he could not play defense and stop the run, although I'm sure in his mentality he would have been on that field playing defense if he was allowed to. No one, including Oregon, was prepared for the Ezekiel Elliott explosion in the postseason, who then kept going and ran for 246 yards with 4 touchdowns against the Ducks, leading them to a 42-17 20 victory in that national championship game, winning that national championship again. Oregon at this point is now 0-9 all time against the Buckeyes, and even Mariota could not drag this team over the hump, and Ohio State and Oregon would not see each other again from that game until 2021. A lot happened between the time of that national championship game to the next time Ohio State and Oregon saw each other. Oregon went through a bit of a rough period, leading to Mark Helfrich being fired after the 2016 4-8 season, creating a coaching carousel that ended up landing on Mario Cristobal being the coach by the time that 2021 game came about. And Urban Meyer left Ohio State, leaving Ryan Day to fill in the gaps and fill in those big shoes that Meyer left, leading the Buckeyes. Oregon jumped right into the 2021 season, playing Ohio State in week 2 at Columbus at the Shoe. Oregon this season had Anthony Brown at quarterback, and they didn't think he really had much of a chance against QB CJ Stroud for the Buckeyes. They weren't really sold on Brown, especially in comparison to having the Mariota era and the Justin Herbert era before him. Star defensive end Kayvon Thibodeau for Oregon was also out of this game due to injury, so the defensive roster took a major hit in many people's eyes. And Ohio State, they were ranked number 3 at this time, and Oregon was ranked number 12. And Ohio State, though, was looking for a national championship run this year. They thought they had the team built. The odds were against Oregon yet again in Columbus. So the 14-7 Oregon lead that they had at halftime was more than enough of a moral victory for Duck fans all across the globe. Turns out Oregon was not really much interested in moral victories against Ohio State, especially after this game. Not only did Oregon's defense make up for Thibodeau's absence enough to contain the Ohio State offense and CJ Stroud, but Anthony Brown had one of the best, if not the best game that he has had in a Duck uniform. But the real killer in that game was the coming out party for an Oregon running back hailing from down here in Chula Vista, California. Verdell rushed for an astonishing 161 yards on 20 carries. That is an 8-yard per carry average against a vaunted Ohio State defense. And the biggest contributor for CJ's average.
Watch out! CJ Verdell at midfield. High stepping. Can the Bucks catch him? Verdell still running. Touchdown, Oregon. 77 yards on 3rd down and 3. The 3rd touchdown of the game for CJ Verdell.
This 77-yard touchdown run in the 3rd quarter that broke this game open enough where that was the eventual difference in the game. Stroud led a 4th quarter comeback with the Buckeyes outscoring Oregon 14-0 in the 4th quarter. And they were on their way to tie the game, and it was looking like the calm, cool, collected blue blood was going to do what they were supposed to do in the end, and Oregon was just holding on for dear life. And that was until Verone McKinley III picked off a pass by Stroud in Oregon territory with just 3 minutes left, leaving the Oregon offense to be able to run out the clock and win the game in the Shoe, upsetting Ohio State 35-28, the first ever win for Oregon against Ohio State in program history. After the 2021 game, Oregon and Ohio State didn't see each other for another few years until 2024 in an October matchup. Ryan Day had finally been given the reins completely after Urban Meyer leaving, and he had built the Ohio State team in his image while utilizing offensive coordinator Chip Kelly as the leader of the offense. The team was a super team. Dan Lanning has now become the Oregon head coach in his third year after Mario Cristobal had left by that time since the last matchup. And Oregon was becoming a team that was being built in Dan Lanning's image. So this game was a very interesting one that was taking place in October in Autzen Stadium. The differences between this game and the one in 2021 was a couple things. One, Oregon was now in the Big Ten Conference. This was their first year in the conference. This game now had conference implications. Ohio State was ranked number 2 and Oregon was ranked number 3. So this had playoff implications, and also because of this Clash of the Titans conference matchup, this was also for college football supremacy reasons. People imagined a dogfight, and it was. Going into this game, there was some concern about Oregon's offense. In the previous games before this, they hadn't quite clicked yet. There was a little bit of struggle and some shooting themselves in the foot leading up to this game, which is why people thought it might be a 10-point game for Ohio State to win this one. But seemed like Oregon finally got their swag back and found their rhythm against Ohio State, and they were able to trade punches against this team in Autzen Stadium, and that they did. Ohio State did score first in the first series of the game, going up 7-0, but Oregon settled in and ended up taking a 22-21 lead at halftime. Now it's a very slim lead, but it's a lead nonetheless, considering how everyone sort of thought it might have gone in the meantime. Ohio State, though, quickly did take the lead back right after the half, up 28-22, leading up to the fourth quarter. Oregon then got their groove back in that fourth quarter and retook the lead 29-28 after quarterback Dylan Gabriel took it 27 yards on his legs to the house. And Ohio State, though, quickly responded with the field goal, going up 31-29. But then Oregon then struck back, hitting a field goal of their own, going up 32-31 with less than 2 minutes left. Now this 2 minutes was quite interesting. Ohio State was looking to drive, and they were in command of that drive deep in Oregon territory, and all they needed was a field goal to win. They were in field goal territory until Jeremiah Smith was called for this offensive pass interference that knocked them out of good field goal range into sort of a coin flip field goal range. There was still enough time for Ohio State to get back that yardage and get into good field goal range until Oregon was penalized for an illegal substitution on this play. And that play ran time off the clock, and it was 3rd down and 25, not giving Ohio State enough time to get back and get a chance to be in good enough field goal range. They had to make a play to get a touchdown to win. Oregon then takes their second game in a row against Ohio State, defeating them with a final score of 32-31. Oregon finished the regular season ranked number 1, basically from that point on all the way to the Big Ten Conference Championship game that they won. They won the Big Ten Conference the first year in it. Not many people were expecting that to be the case. Now, Ohio State had a bit of a different path. They were thinking they were not really playing up to the standards they knew that they were capable of, especially after a loss to their heated rival, Michigan, right during the time the conference championships were being played. They were at risk, just like 2014, to just miss the playoffs. But they ended up getting in as a number 8 seed because this year was the first year that the college football playoff expanded from 4 teams to 12. So they were able to make it in after all with only 2 losses on the season, and certainly the one against Oregon was counted as a quality loss. However, I'm sure it was considered that the Michigan game was also considered a quality loss. Now, Ohio State played Tennessee in the first round of the playoff, and then though, because of their seeding and their bracket placement, they were going to play Oregon one more time in a rematch in the 2024 Rose Bowl game. Now, as mentioned before, those two losses seemed to motivate the Buckeyes to finally play to those standards that they knew that they were capable of. Because once that playoff started, they became an absolute buzzsaw. They ran through Tennessee, and they looked like they were about to do so against Oregon. And they did. Oregon looked asleep in this game. They looked like they didn't even want to be on the field. And Ohio State was not going to let up on the gas, especially if Oregon was going to let them take the wheel. So much so, Ohio State was up 34-8 at halftime. This game was not even close. It was an absolute massacre, and it wasn't as close as the 41-21 final score suggests. After that, Ohio State marched right along to another national championship victory. Ohio State leads this overall series against Oregon 10 wins to 2 losses. We'll see how it goes this year.